Good evening, everyone. Hi. My name is Guy Sergi, and I'm a Kevin Harrington Student Ambassador. On behalf of the faculty, staff, and students here at the Institute of Politics, we'd like to welcome you for coming this evening at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. The Institute's mission is to educate, engage, and empower citizens of all ages in the civic and political life of their communities and to strengthen democracy. The Institute is nonpartisan and does not endorse political issues or candidates. Before we begin this evening's program, I'd like to remind you to please turn off any cell phones or devices that make noise. In following Dr. Bradley's remarks, he will do a brief question and answer period. And if you notice, there are two microphones set up right in the back here. So if you have a question at the end, just approach those microphones and state your question. So tonight I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Arthur Bradley. Dr. Bradley got his PhD from Auburn University, and he's a published author of 3 books dealing with effective disaster preparedness plans. And an engineer with NASA who understands the importance of being prepared, Dr. Bradley was deeply struck by the attacks that took place on September 11, 2001. And in the years following that tragic day, the globe has been witness to tsunamis, hurricanes, earthquakes, and much more. Dr. Bradley is here today to discuss his book, How to Prepare for a Practical Disaster. The book talks about the importance of preparing and outlines a step-by-step process to creating an effective disaster preparedness plan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in introducing Dr. Arthur Bradley.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. I am Dr. Arthur Bradley. It's my pleasure to meet you. My pleasure to be here. So we have about 45 minutes together, maybe an hour if we push it. There's only so much we're going to be able to cover, talk about a big topic like disaster preparedness. So I encourage you to make it relevant to what you're concerned about, ask questions about things you're thinking about. I'll try and present just sort of an overview of disaster preparedness in this time. All right, so the book that I'm here to talk about today, or the one they have for sale in the back, is the Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family. And it's, if those of you that have looked at it and read it, it's sort of an overall reference manual for disaster preparedness. It covers a lot of topics: food storage, water purification, radio systems, bug out, what do you take with you if you had to escape, those sorts of things. So it's a very general reference manual. But today I'm going to try and make it a little more personal as we go through this. All right, so I only really have one request. Oh, I got 2 screens, but one request. And that is that I ask that you actively participate in the talk, okay? So I've already seen these slides plenty of times. Maybe you haven't yet. But so if you see something of interest, or you see something that doesn't make sense, or you just want to chat about something, tell me a story, that's all fine, okay? We're all here to just sort of share that information together. So I put in here, if you want to play the devil's advocate, go ahead. That's fine too. So if you want to throw stones, say, I don't agree with that, that's all right. That means you're thinking about it. That's good, okay? I can hold my own. We can have a friendly debate about topics. So for the next 45 minutes, we're all going to be part of a community of preppers, okay? These people who, despite what you see on the National Geographic Channel, we're not all buried in bunkers or anything like that, okay? That was sort of an injustice to the movement, but that's all right. All right, so we're here to learn together. All right, so the big question in the book I ask this, the first thing you ask when you do anything is why bother, right? Why go to the trouble even to spend my money, spend my time, to worry about different things? And you need to have an answer for that. If you don't have an answer for that you believe in, you probably just stop right in the beginning. Don't go any further. So I wrote a little blurb here, and I'll just read it to you. I hate people who read charts, but I forget exactly what I'm going to say. It says, 99% of the time, everything works great. All right? The world spins like a top. The skies are clear, and your refrigerator's full of milk and cheese. But know with certainty that the world is a dangerous place. Storms rage, fires burn, and diseases spread. No one is ever completely safe. Not you, not your children, not the richest man alive. We all live as part of a very complex ecosystem that at its core is unpredictable and willing to kill us without remorse or pause, right? We live in a world where nothing is certain, right? We like to think it is. Certainly in this day and age, we have so many safety nets and so many agencies looking out for us and all these things. We think we're always sort of protected. But if you ever live through these big disasters, the Katrina-style disasters, right? big events, you realize very quickly that those safety nets will not catch you, right? You have to catch yourself. They'll help you pick up the pieces, but they generally won't catch you. So at the end of it, I just say anything can happen, right? Why bother? Because anything can happen, right? And some of us would like to be prepared for that. We want to keep our family safe, okay? All right, so some observations. Right? I've been doing this for a while, and I've picked up a few nuggets, and I'll try and share those with you at the beginning and at the end. So the first one is preparing should always be motivated out of love, okay? Never out of fear. Right? I know that sounds corny. It sounds like something you'd read on a fortune cookie or something. But if you think about the things you've done in your life that were really meaningful, right? Really meaningful, really important, they usually are motivated by love, right? They're motivated by love of your kids or love of your spouse or love of your parents, love of your faith, whatever it is, they're usually motivated by love. The things that people do when they're afraid typically they do not come out very well, do they? Because they make decisions haphazardly, they don't make rational decisions, and then they end up in trouble. All right? So that's the point I'm trying to get to. And you'll see a lot of the movement, this preparedness movement, they do try and instill fear because that sells books and that sells products and that gets you to do things they want you to do. But I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. If you're doing things for fear, you're probably not going to have the right outcome. Okay? All right, realize from the beginning that you cannot prepare for everything. Right? Be nice if you could, right? But you can't. You can prepare as much as you want. Come to me, I will throw something at you, some disaster that will kill you, okay? Of course, right? You can't prepare for everything. So know what you're preparing for, right? We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. Know why you did what you did. Know what it's there for. Preparedness is a very personal thing, all right? There's no one right answer. The preparedness steps that somebody's going to take out here in the audience is very different than the steps my family takes, and it's very different than the steps that somebody else takes. If you're a retired couple living in downtown Manhattan versus a person who lives out in a rural community in Kansas, you have very different worries and very different preparations, right? So it's a very personal thing. So this is what I hinted at earlier. Remember that our nation is only able to do so much to protect its citizens. Now, I'm a huge patriot. I love my nation. I love our government. I love the way we do business. I'm proud of our country. But I am a reasonable person, and I can understand they cannot protect everyone in the United States from all dangers. Okay? Ultimately, you are responsible for your family's safety, right? No excuses. All right, and so the last one, preparing works best with a plan, right? Like most things, you have a set of goals that you'd like to accomplish, and it would be nice to document your plan so that you can address it as effectively as you can. Being in school, students learn that very well, right? You put together your plan, you follow a plan to the desired outcome. All right, so when I talk about disasters, somebody asked me when I was coming in, well, are you talking about like earthquakes, or what do you mean by disasters? And really, I'm talking about all disasters, okay? So I try to break that up here. So types of disasters. The big ones are the ones we see all the time, the natural disasters, right? That's just, we live on a planet that is just filled with natural disasters, right? From earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, tsunamis, ice storms, snowstorms, sinkholes. You saw the news probably not too long ago. A guy fell into a sinkhole in his house, laying on his bed all of a sudden, right? So we live in a dangerous world just by the fact that we're on this planet. But then there are other types of disasters. There's pandemics, right? Everybody watching the news lately? What's the big pandemic scare right now? Avian flu, right? Avian flu. There's a new strain of avian flu out in China that's killed, I don't know, a dozen people or so far. They don't know how it's being transmitted from person to person. Is it because they're all eating something? Is it because they're contacting something? They don't know, all right? But certainly the laundry list of pandemics that could change our planet is a long one, okay? If you want to get worried, start doing some serious reading about pandemics and how many people they kill. Consider that smallpox killed 300 million people in the 20th century, all right? That's a lot of people, all right? So pandemics, viruses especially, can kill a lot of people in a short time, all right? Man-made disasters. Oh, boy, we had that 2011, right? We had a combination of a natural disaster and a man-made disaster. Everybody remember that? Where was that at? Japan, right? Off the coast of Japan. Had a big earthquake, right? It happens in Japan. They have earthquakes all the time. Generated tsunamis. Tsunami came in. They weren't quite ready for it as they should have been. killed tens of thousands of people, and caused a nuclear plant to go into meltdown, right? Fukushima plant. And then what happened? Well, they did everything they could. You've got to take their hat off. They were trying everything they could. People were risking their lives to try and get that plant under control. Couldn't quite do it. They released a bunch of radiation into the air, right? Radioactive particles. They started floating over the ocean, coming towards California. You can imagine my email started lighting up. People writing me, am I in danger? I'm in California. There's radiation coming this way. What do we do, right? Now, those are very real threats. War, terrorism, crime. Oh boy, right? Do we need to say anything else about that, right? Terrible events we see happening all the time. And then personal disasters. Things like you losing your job or your spouse dying or going through a divorce, having some unexpected financial problem. Your business goes under or your house gets a tree fall through the roof, right? Those things happen. Now, you might say they're not on the same order of a hurricane, but they affect you in many times the same ways, right? So it would be nice is if everybody in the United States said, you know, I recognize there are a lot of dangers out here that I need to kind of be prepared for, right? Some level of preparedness. That's what I'm about, okay? That's what I'm about. All right, so just flashing up some different disasters. Some of these you might recognize, some maybe not. I swear I've been through most of these in one capacity. Many of us have, right? Whether flooded cars or, of course, 9/11 up there, the earthquakes and tornadoes. I lived in Alabama. You can probably tell from the accent a little bit. And we had tornadoes many times. We had to hide in bunkers and hide in buildings from tornadoes. The lower right one's an interesting one. That's the smog, right? There's a big danger right now in the world. We don't appreciate it here in the United States, just how clean our area is here. But if you travel internationally, especially if you've ever been anywhere like, let's say, Vietnam or Beijing, and you breathe the polluted air for a while, you realize, wow, this is a real problem, okay? Of course, Katrina is in the bottom left corner down there. That's the big Superdome event. We could spend an hour just talking about that. The cardinal rule. All right, so where do you start? You start with the cardinal rule. Now, I often say many people die because they've either forgotten or just disregarded the cardinal rule. So what is it? The cardinal rule says that the cardinal rule to surviving any disaster is whenever possible, get out of its way. Makes sense, right? If you see trouble coming and you have the ability to get out of its way, get out of its way, right? Okay? That seems so obvious, right? Now, there are many things we cannot escape, or we choose not to. We think, I can ride that out, and it makes sense. But there are others that you cannot get out, that you cannot survive if you don't get out of the way, all right? Now, you have to recognize that. What are a few examples? Anybody? Hurricane? Iffy. I say maybe. Sometimes you can survive it, and sometimes you can't, right? It was a governor, I forget which one it was. I think it was down in Florida a few years back. Big hurricane approaching. People were not evacuating. It was like a Category 4. He said, I tell you what, don't evacuate if you don't want to. But do me a favor, take a Sharpie marker and write your Social Security number on your arm so that it's easier to identify your body. Now, that got their attention. Right? That got their attention. Okay, so yes, hurricanes are definitely a possibility. What else? Anybody else have others? Tsunami. Tsunami, I have a video, but we probably won't show it tonight. But if you've seen any of the videos of the Japanese tsunami coming up, you realize there's nothing you can do. You can store food all day long, you can have guns all day long, there's nothing you can do that's going to survive that wall of water. So yeah, so I threw a few down too. How about a house fire? That's an example of when danger is that you get out of the way, right? You try and escape, you save your life. Radiological release is another one. We could come up with a big laundry list of things you want to get out of the way. So don't forget the cardinal rule. Yes, you want to be prepared, but the cardinal rule trumps everything, okay? All right. This is I'll talk over them a little. This is a little short video that was off of YouTube, I think. And it's a cute video to bring out the cardinal rule. These people are all out on the edge of their waterfront property, and they're watching a tornado roll in. Now, it's fascinating. Oh, look, there's a tornado. It's coming. Yeah. Now, what do you think? Are they following the cardinal rule? No, they're not following the cardinal rule. It's all very fun and games until it's not fun and games, right? And it's just a minute or so. But it's worth watching because there's a point where you see them recognize their mistake, all right? It's starting to get there as they run for their house, right? right? This is a tragedy waiting to happen, isn't it, right? Now, these people were very, very lucky, all right? They were lucky the tornado didn't hit them outright. They were lucky that nobody got hurt by flying glass. And it ended up they were able to capture their own moment of stupidity and probably have a good laugh at it. The point I was really just trying to drill home is you have to use a lot of good common sense when you're trying to avoid getting killed, right? These people were not using good common sense. Don't forget the cardinal rule, all right? All right, so before we start, you're like, what do you mean before we start? We're at 15 minutes in. We have to do a formality, all right? I like to do this to make a point. So to become a true prepper, I need you to do something for me. I need you to raise your hands above your head. This is mandatory. All right, sorry. You raise your hand, and you have to say, the sky is falling, the sky is falling, okay? Yeah, the sky is falling. All right. So that, if you kind of become a prepper, or you just be into preparing, you're going to be accused of this, okay? You are going to be accused. Believe me, I have had many times. The point of this silliness is to get it out of your system now, so you don't feel threatened by that sort of comment, okay? Because people would say, oh, you know, he's just trying to scare everybody. He's not in touch with reality, or whatever the case may be. He thinks the world's going to, end tomorrow. It's to recognize, yes, people are going to they're going to come at you from that angle, and that's okay, right? Get that silliness out now, all right? And don't fall into that trap. Don't fall into running around saying the sky's falling, okay? Be practical, be rational in what you do. All right, so here we go. We're actually going to get started on our preparedness. All that's just setting the stage. So there's a guy named Maslow that sort of came up with a list of needs, of human needs, and said, hey, to stay alive, what do you need? It's worth knowing that. So there's this 8, I call my basic 8. Food, water, shelter, those are always the top 3, right? Everybody know nothing else. If you're a wilderness survivalist, it's always food, water, shelter. Which one comes first? Shelter. Because shelter gets you out of the elements, right? And then comes water, and then comes food. Now, you can argue if you're in the desert, water might come first. All right, I'll go with you. But generally, if you're a survivalist, shelter comes first, then comes water, then comes food. Light. Well, yeah, you got to have light. Darkness is very dangerous, right? Very dangerous. Heating and cooling. Well, you don't want to freeze to death. Air. Clean air to breathe. Most threats don't threaten our air supply, but some do. Sleep. And hygiene and sanitation. Without any one of those 8, pretty quickly you're going to die. All right, pretty quickly. Without any one of those 8. I take away one, you'll probably die. You could maybe make a case where you could survive without one for a short period of time. And then there's some supporting needs that help you make life better, help you survive better. And those are things like medicine and first aid. Oh, we definitely like medicine and first aid. Communications, right? The ability to reach out and call for help. Let people know you're okay. Let people know what's going on so they don't fall into some sort of danger. Electrical power, big one, right? Without electrical power, as we all know, I'm sure everybody suffered plenty of blackouts. Life takes a whole different turn, doesn't it? When all of a sudden you lose the technology around you. Financial security, that's an odd one. But this was a book about earthquakes. But there's a whole chapter in there about financial security because your finances enable you to do things, right? And they're an integral part of our lives. They definitely can be affected. Transportation. Being able to get from point A to point B, getting out of the way of the danger. And protection. That's the one of the survivalists, right? Got to have my guns, got to have my bullets. Okay, I can respect that. All those support your needs as well. So I have 14. I call them the 14 needs. So I break the book up into 14 chapters, and those 14 chapters try and address those needs, and then there's a couple other chapters that are more general. Okay, so when you first sit down, you say, I'm going to start preparing for disasters. All right, I've identified my needs, but now where do I get started? What am I going to prepare for? All right, and there's different ways to do this. There's a philosophy that says, don't prepare for anything except for the truly world-changing disasters, the biggies. Because everything else, you'll manage. The government will step in, people will step in, and you'll manage. That's a philosophy, okay? And it probably would serve you okay most of the time. Doesn't serve everybody okay because there's people who die, right? But that's a philosophy. Only worry about the biggies. Of course, the first philosophy is don't worry about anything, right? And then my philosophy is start by preparing for the likely threats first. Figure out what you're worried about. You live in New Hampshire, you're worried about certain things. I live in Virginia. I'm worried about different things. I'm worried about a hurricane hitting. I know because I've had hurricanes hit me. You live in Alabama, you're worried about tornadoes. You're not worried about earthquakes. You live in California, maybe so, right? You need to think about the things you're worried about. Are you living 3 miles away from a nuclear plant? I live about 15 miles from one, right? Do you even know, right? They hide those things, in case you didn't know. All right, so, but really, understanding what are the likely threats. What are you worried about, all right? Figure those out. So identify the threats most likely to affect your family, or you if you live alone. And of course, that's dependent on your own vulnerabilities, where you're at, what the world's doing at the time. And then, based on those threats, assess the possible impacts of them. Well, there's common sense, right? If it's going to be a big, major snowstorm you're most worried about, well, what could happen? Well, could be my pipes could freeze, so I might not have any water. Could be the stores might all get closed. Roads might be impassable. Electricity might go out. Probably all those things have happened at one time, right? So you start jotting those down. You go, yeah, okay, those are impacts. I need to think about it. So that's step 2, right? Step 2 is to figure out what might happen from these events. And then step 3 is to figure out some preparations to help mitigate those impacts. All right, if the stores get closed and I can't get to them for a week, I need to have at least that much food on hand, right? I need to have a way to be able to prepare it if the electricity's out, and so forth. So you start thinking through that event and how those things are impacted and what you can do to mitigate them. And you jot all that down into a plan, okay? I'm a big advocate of putting it down on paper or in a computer or somewhere where you have it organized as a plan. I often tell people, don't throw money at the problem. If you have so much money that you can just throw it at any little thing you think about, just throw it at me, okay? That'll be fine. Use your money wisely. Use your time wisely, all right? If you have a plan, then you can target things carefully. You can go, gosh, I really would like a generator, but I have these other 6 things I want to do too, and they're not as expensive. Maybe I'll take care of some of those first, right? You'll have a logic to what you do. Otherwise, and I always tell this to my wife when we go out on the weekends and do the yard sale shopping, you can find all kinds of stuff that people bought that they thought one day would be useful that was maybe pretty expensive that you're getting for 2 cents on the dollar because they didn't put a lot of thought into it, okay? Don't end up with a closet full of junk, right? That's what I tell people. Don't end up with a closet full of junk. Know what you buy, why you buy it, what it's used for, and use it. Okay, so a plan. What's a plan? DP is my abbreviation for disaster preparedness, okay? Just because I say it so many times in the book, I just call it DP. A DP plan is simply a tool to help you get your preparations in order. You can document it any way you like. Okay, I have an example of one in the book of how I document one, but you can make it however you want, okay? But it might consist of those things that we just talked about, which was a list of the threats, the threat assessment, which is what might the impacts be, and then how do I take some steps to help mitigate those, right? That's the organization it might have. Yours might be organized in some slightly different way, but at the end, I think you'll probably have that information in it. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We could easily spend a day going through all of the 14 needs and topics. What I thought we'd do is maybe just come up with a sample, do like a little sampling for a few minutes, and then we can take questions about specific topics, okay? Because we just only have so much time. So let's come up with a couple of threats and just kind of create sample plan entries. What would a DP plan look like for those? So I thought, well, what would be reasonable topics for here? Well, major snowstorm. Everybody here is an expert on major snowstorms, right? I would think, right? And pandemics. Well, pandemics are pretty timely right now, right? I was asked at dinner, what of all the threats worries me most? And pandemic worries me the most, okay? So just for whatever that's worth, which is, that's a world-changing type event could happen through a pandemic. All right, so let's say those were our worries, and we want to go through some of the steps. So the first thing, food. It's a good place to start. So I might just, these are qualitative, color code my dangers up there. Food, well, the danger on my food supply from a winter storm is not great, right? It's not a great danger. It's not like we're going to be without food for months. But it might interrupt my ability to get food for a week, right? So I'll call it yellow. A pandemic on food, well, that's a tricky one. The main type pandemics that we see might be pretty modest. We might lose some ability to get food. But I could draw a scenario where it was a really significant pandemic that might cause you to be without access to food for months, right? But I'm still just going to call it yellow. I don't want to scare anybody, okay? So, of course, everybody's food is different. This was one option, and that was the other, right? You buy what you think you need, okay? All right, so we do that little assessment. The assessment says the storm or pandemic might make resupplying on groceries difficult or dangerous. All right, that's kind of our assessment. How much do I need? Oh, that's a very personal question, right? That's like asking someone how they voted in the last election or something, right? This is a very personal question. How much food do you need to store? Many people will immediately jump up and say, you need 1 year's worth of food. Okay? How many people, I'm just curious, how many people have a year's worth of food stored? Oh, we got a couple? Great. Let me get your addresses before you go in case I need to. No, it's fantastic. What does that say? That says they are very serious about their food preparation. In no way do I knock that. But what I will say is that for most disasters, 30 days of food is adequate. Would anybody disagree with that? Okay. You disagree? Okay.
90 days.
Okay, you said 90 days. Others may say a year. The reason I say 30 days is in my lifetime, in all the disasters I have faced, and in my parents' lifetime and the disasters they've faced, and all my friends who I've ever spoken with and all the people I've ever really interviewed in detail, 30 days would have got them through it. Is there events that could cause more than 30 days of food shortage? Sure. Of course there are. All right? But they're uncommon. All right? They're uncommon. Should you have more than 30 days of food? Probably. All right? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to set a bar at which you can step over. All right? The bar that I tell people is a 30-day food supply is probably adequate to withstand most things that would happen. All right? And we could go through the various disasters and we could talk about why that would be. The truth of it is, if you have 30 days of food, you are so far ahead of your neighbors, so far ahead of the others around you, you'll spend most of your time having to shoot the neighbors, right? I mean, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but people get desperate when they don't have supplies, right? So my point is, though, people are terribly underprepared, terribly underprepared. Either the government will have to put in emergency relief or people will be out on the streets taking what they can. Every family should stock its own supply. You can't rely on others for something so basic as food and water. And you can certainly be part of a network, and you should be part of a network that has established some kind of central food bank. Now, the nice thing about that is everybody pitches in a little bit, and if you find people that are less prepared in your network, they can draw on the food bank. If you decide you want to do some charitable effort for some other people, you can do that. It's an emergency group. A lot of times churches do this. They pull together food banks for the community, and when push comes to shove, they'll open it up and help feed the community. That's great, right? A network can operate in that same way, except they maybe don't broaden their charity to the whole community. They just broaden it to their own network and their families, right? So types of food. Well, there are many, many types of food. If you only do a 30-day supply, you can store pretty much anything, right? You can store regular box food. You can store canned food. Now, you got to be careful about the refrigerated or frozen having too much of that, because if you lose power, you kind of lose that food fairly quickly, right? But in general, you don't have to have special purpose foods, is what I'm trying to get at. A supply of 30 days, however, is a lot of food. How many people think they have 30 days of food? Pretty good group. Most people have less than 7 in their homes. Studies say that. I believe that. All right, so I have a family of 4 kids and a wife, and so I often think of it this way. Well, how much is 30 days supply of food? Well, it's 30 breakfasts, 30 lunches, 30 dinners. What if we all ate a box of Cheerios each morning? Just to keep it simple. So box of Cheerios, my family can finish a box of Cheerios in a morning. 6 of us eating a box of Cheerios, no problem. So I need 30 boxes of Cheerios, right, to have a 30-day supply. Now, that's simple because, of course, we're not all eating the same thing every day. But you get my point, right? It's a lot of food. That's a lot of food to have stored and ready to be able to make a full month without any help. So they say for a family of 5, that would be, if you run all the numbers, about 1,000 pounds of food. Well, we won't weigh it all, but it's a lot of food, right? In general, I advise store what you eat and eat what you store. All right? Now, if you don't do this, a lot of people will buy emergency foods that last a very long time, and they don't eat that because it's intentionally bought for emergency food. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about going out and buying tubs of tuna fish and beef jerky and other things that are great survival food, right? But then you never eat them because they don't sound very good, right? And so they just sit there, and they just sit there until maybe they expire and you're worried about eating them. So instead of doing that, buy the food that you normally eat and just rotate it, right? Keep your food rotated so that you're always eating the older food. It's only 30 days old, so it's perfectly fresh. You're always putting the newest stuff to the rear. For true world-changing disasters, you may wish to consider some foods that have very long shelf lives. Or if you're having a network where you do that that pooled resource of food that's not going to be tapped into very often, you might want to have some kind of this food that will have a very long shelf life. So those are things like MREs. How many have eaten MREs? Some Army people, yeah, or military people, right? I have eaten my share of MREs too. I even ate C rations before the MREs. That was when I was in the military. So they are pretty good, right? They're ready to eat. They're very rugged. They're high calorie, 1,200 calories a pack, right? They don't taste so great, but they're okay. You can live on them. They have a shelf life of about 3 years at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that's a little tricky on this whole shelf life of MREs. There's a lot of misinformation about it. I talk about it in the book. If you buy them by the case, there's a little indicator on them. The indicator tells you how fresh they are, okay? It has to do with the storage environments and the time. So be careful about buying just packages of MREs. You have no idea of how fresh those are, okay? All right, I'm not going to go through all of the details for time here, but freeze-dried foods. Yeah, freeze-dried foods are great, right? You can buy those, Mountain House, or a lot of different companies sell freeze-dried foods, right? And those are great because they look good, they taste pretty good, they last for a long time, right? Anywhere from 7 years for the little pouches all the way up to 25 years for the cans. So good survival food, good for these pantries where you're storing them. And then dehydrated foods, similar but different way of processing them than the freeze-dried, right? These are dried at warmer temperatures, kind of chewy if you didn't rehydrate them. And they're great too, right? You can buy dehydrated fruits and dehydrated vegetables. They're usually simple foods. By that I mean they're not complex. You don't buy dehydrated lasagna, right? You can buy freeze-dried lasagna, but you don't buy dehydrated lasagna, all right? You usually dehydrate a type of food, a simple food like peas or corn, okay? All right, so how do you store it? Well, you store it however you can figure out how to store it. Everybody's house is a little different, and you have to get a little creative sometimes. Maybe under the stairwells or in closets, under beds. I forget which politician it was that said that, something about storing tuna fish under your bed. So you get clever. You find space. You make it efficient. Keep it at the right temperature and in the right environment. It'll last much longer, right? Ideally, if we had the ideal world, we would keep our pantry between 40 and 60. Our refrigerator, which we can control, should be between 34 and 40, and then the freezer should be as close to 0 as you can get it. Yeah?
Freeze-dried and dehydrated foods can be eaten as they sit, or do they have to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question is, can you eat freeze-dried and dehydrated food right out of the bag? The answer is yes, you can. You can certainly eat them. A lot of people love to eat freeze-dried pineapple, for example. Of course, we eat dehydrated fruits all the time, right? You can eat them just like snacks, but they typically are rehydrated if they're made into a meal. Like if you have a stew, a freeze-dried stew, you would rehydrate it before you ate it, right? But yes, they're safe to eat. Trivia question. So you put something in the freezer, it's at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. How long does it last? Almost forever. Almost forever. In a perfect world, if it's 0 degrees F, the bacteria can't multiply and grow. Yes, it will get coated in the frost. We all are familiar with that. But that food is still safe to eat. You can cut it off if you don't want, but it's still safe to eat. So food that is kept frozen at 0 degrees Fahrenheit is truly safe almost indefinitely. All right? So that's the advantage of keeping it frozen. Yes?
Yeah, is that including like freezer burn?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about, the freezer burn. The word was slipping my mind. Freezer burn food is okay to eat. You can eat it. It doesn't taste so good, and it's not, the texture and stuff's not right. So most people prefer to cut it off, but it doesn't endanger you. It doesn't put you in danger. So the rule that I tell people, though, is, and I'm talking about really dangerous situations where you've, oh my goodness, all I've got left is my frozen food, but oh, it's a little bit freezer burned. What's in your freezer, if it's kept frozen at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, is safe to eat, okay? Almost indefinitely. Store the food out of light and away from appliances. Keep it dry and tightly sealed. If you can remember just dry, tightly sealed, and away from heat, right? The food will last much longer. Sir?
Why do we store it away from appliances?
Because appliances radiate the heat.
Oh, just simply to keep it away from the heat.
Yeah, so a lot of times people put food on top of the refrigerator, but the heat will rise up the back of the refrigerator and warm the food. Yes, ma'am.
If there was an electromagnetic event,
Yes.
would that contaminate food and cans?
No, it would not. It's a good question. If there was a big electromagnetic event, like an EMP, solar storm, something like that, would it affect the food? It would not. What about radiation? I'm just going to play off your question. What if there's a big radiation fallout? There's some fallout that comes over an area. Does it contaminate the food? It does. However, It doesn't contaminate food that's sealed, either in plastic bags or in cans, but it has to be safely cleaned, right? You can't handle the can, contaminate the food, and then ingest it, right? So the food inside is safe, but you have to figure out a way to clean it and get to it. Produce, however, anything like that is considered suspect. And there's a whole bunch of stories of the people in Chernobyl that ate produce that was contaminated.
What if you don't have power and the food gets frozen and defrosted?
Yeah, then all bets are off. Don't eat it then. Yeah, once you get warmed up the food, you've generated all that bacteria in there. You have to dispose of it, or you have to have a big barbecue for the neighbors, right? In time.
If it's a canned food or
Well, canned food's generally not. It doesn't matter if it's, I mean, you can spoil quicker with canned food if it's warmed, but most canned food lasts about 5 years, safe to eat for 5 years. If you look on the cans, they're usually about 2 years, but they're usually safe for about 5 years. So, but again, that's environmental, right? If I stored it at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, it's not going to last as long as if I stored it at 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's not a real hard rule of thumb there. So here's an entry into a plan. This is the food plan. This is just an example, okay? Yeah, water. Yeah, you'd want to rinse it off.
but you would have to have water that was sealed.
Well, the water supply generally, we could get into a whole discussion on radiation events, but the water supply may not be as affected as the direct fallout on the food. The water's probably, no, I'm not going to say there's not some secondary traces, but it would probably be okay to rinse the food. The events that I've seen, that's what they do. They clean the cans with the water.
From like a well or something.
Right. Right, a buried well, or any kind of circulating water system where you flush the water out. Now, a whole radiation event we'd have a different plan for, but it's a good question. So here's what a food plan might look like, though. On the left, you would say, what are the dangers? Well, in this case, I'm worried about food shortages or inabilities to get to the store. And then I go down through the goals that I have. I want to feed my family. I want to feed a network. I identify the needs. I don't forget about my pets. And then I take what steps I'm going to take. You identify those specific steps. Those are specific things you're going to do. Put up some shelves, buy some extra food, do this, do that, okay? All right, let's try and get through water before we run out of time. So water. Well, the winter storm could certainly cause some big problems if it freezes our water supply. Pandemic, again, could interfere by maybe making people sick, where they wouldn't be able to man the water stations. So that's what I just said. Don't underestimate the importance of water. Those people that had a year's worth of food, there were a couple, how many store water? Ah, God bless you all, yes. So yeah, a lot of people do prepare by storing food, but they don't think about the water supply. We keep some water. Yes, sir. Okay. Great. That, you're going to see that here in just a second. Yep, you have a resource to get to. Yep.
Legally, it's 55 gallons maximum in the state of New Hampshire.
Water or fuel? 55?
Yeah,
okay.
more than that.
Yeah, a lot of places it's a lot less than that. All right, so onward. So 3 approaches. Have a permanent stockpile. That means you have a big tank somewhere. Fill the containers when a disaster is imminent, or scavenge once the disaster hits. I guess the well falls into that stockpile as well, as long as you have a way to get to it. So water stockpiling, people like the 55-gallon drums. Those are great, as long as they don't crack from freezing, so you have to keep them where they don't freeze. It gives you a peace of mind, right? Every day I walk by, I pat my water jug as I go in the house, right? I know that sounds silly, but you know, there is something to that. It's bulky, can be messy, spring a leak, you're in for a mess. You have to keep it in the right place. You don't want to keep it near the fuel tanks. You don't want to keep it anywhere that it would freeze. You don't want to keep it near the paint cans, things where it might infect, you know, basically get into your water supply and cause it to be unsafe to drink.
Where does one get that kind of a drum? Those are pretty
Oh, you can buy them on the web. Yeah, search 55-gallon water drum, pop right up. Baytech, I think, has them. They're Craigslist. Craigslist? Yeah, you can find them. Yeah, yeah, they have to be food grade, which means they're usually blue, but yeah, but they'll specifically state. Yours are white? Okay. Yeah, and don't buy old fuel cans or anything else. Buy food grade materials. Water is safe to drink. It's a toughie thing because it depends on where you're at, what conditions, but the rule of thumb is about every 6 months you should rotate your water unless you treat it. If you treat your water, it can last several years, all right? But what you don't want to do is end up in a problem and you go to get your water and you see black mold growing in the inside of the water tank. And you go, gosh, I'm really thirsty, right? But I don't want that black mold, okay? So if you preserve it, there's some preserving products you can get several years out of your water. Water is usually pretty cheap. You drain it, refill it. All right, water containers. Well, there's lots of different kind of containers, from 2-liter pop bottles. You can buy water bags. You can buy jerry cans. These 55-gallon drums, they sell them in other sizes, 30-gallon, I think, and some others. You can buy the big tanks, the big water tankers. That's like a 125-gallon tank. So you can buy them in all different sizes and shapes. Just make sure it's safe to use for water. I have one of the tanks like that, similar to that, I keep in my garage. Don't use, now this is obvious, don't use dirty things as you don't know what was in them. Don't use gas containers, even if they didn't carry gas. That's not a food grade level material. Don't use milk or juice jugs. Why? Because the material from the milk and juice leaches into the plastic and come back into the water. Right? And don't use any chemical containers, even a bleach bottle. Yes, ma'am.
What about water from the water heater?
It's coming. Good, great question. So your question was, what about water from the water heater? So scavenging, that's the question. What if we don't have water? I have been here, maybe others have been here, where we're like, we don't have water, we got to do something. Hot water heater, top of the list. Yes, hot water heater is a great one, right? Depending on how big a tank you have. We have an 85-gallon tank, I think, at my house. That's a lot of water, quite a bit of water. You can drain them easy enough, open the spigot and flow the valve at the top. Be careful because it's hot, right? You have to be careful. Turn it off, let it cool off first. Water pipes. Anybody ever tried that? Turn off your water outside, drain all the water pipes in the house out of the spigots and see what you can get? I have. How much water do you think you can get? 2-story house, 4 bedrooms? Couple gallons. Couple gallons. Not a lot. There's not a lot of water stored up in the pipes. I always wondered, drain your pipes. And I thought, well, how much would that give me? It'd give me another day. Doesn't give me a lot, okay? But it's something. What's that? Radiators? Toilet tanks. Well, you can get water out of toilet tanks, but we're not going to use that for drinking, right? And we're not going to, and I don't mean the bowls, I mean the tanks. But we're not going to use it for that because it has inorganic material, or organic and inorganic, and chemicals that might be in there, and it's just not considered purifiable. Same way with water beds and same way with swimming pools. If you have a swimming pool and you say, I've got my emergency water source, you're not supposed to drink it, even if you purify it. You can't take out all the organic materials and all the chemicals with standard purification techniques. All right? You can use it for flushing the toilet, though. Rivers, lakes, and springs, if you purify them. And then you can use these natural collection methods like rain and snow collection, a lot of different ways of collecting rain. Dew collection, that's where you run around in the morning when everything's wet with dew and you wipe it with rags and you wring it into buckets. You can get a lot of water that way, gallons and gallons. But it takes some effort. Transpiration, anybody know what transpiration is? That method? It's where you tie clear plastic bags around plants and bushes, and they basically act as a little solar unit for the sun comes in, heats up the plant, releases the water, vapor condenses on the plastic, and you take it out and get some liquid that way. It does tend to kill the plants, however. It's unfortunate. And solar stills, everybody knows what solar still is. Some people do, I'm sure. It's where you dig a hole, right? You put some produce or something down in there that's got moisture in it. You put the plastic and you create that solar event again where the water drips down into a cup at the bottom. That's tricky. If you've never done one, it's tricky to get to work. Okay? Tricky. I'm warning you. Try it. If you don't believe me, build a solar still. You can look it up on the internet. Everybody says it works. Great. Build one. See if you get more water than you put out digging that hole. The sweat you sweat. Some will and some won't. All right. So I summarize. I don't have time to do all this, but I summarize all the different purification methods, what works well on different kind of contaminants. All right. That table's in the book too. I think it's online too on my website. All right. So I'll go quickly through hygiene and sanitation. This is part of the water, right? Not only do you have to drink, you also have to keep clean so you don't transmit illnesses to your body, and you have to have some hygiene and sanitation. So same threats from the water being shut off. So diseases can spread quickly, so of course we want to stay clean. Hand sanitizers are great, but water is critically important to keeping ourselves clean. Becoming sick is bad. Becoming sick when you have no resources or help around you can be life-threatening. So sanitation, well, we got our choices. It's a difficult subject. We can dig a hole. We can use the potty buckets or camp toilets or whatever you want to call those things. We can use what's called a composting toilet, right, which are really cool. Does anybody have a composting toilet? No, they're expensive, expensive. But they're really nice. They're waterless toilets. They turn it into compost. It's really neat. Great for cabins or something. Or you can do what most people do, which is just to ration your water and use your toilet. All you need is a source of water, right? You can pour water in the back of the toilet and flush it, or you can pour it into the bowl of the toilet and we'll pull it down by a vacuum. So as long as you have some water available, a river, a stream, a swimming pool, whatever, you can still operate your commodes. So you need a water budget, all right? So what I suggest to people is a gallon of potable water, that means drinkable water, per day for drinking, and another gallon for hygiene. You don't really want to wash with dirty water, right? So 1 gallon for drinking and cooking and 1 for hygiene. So 2 gallons a day. And then some non-potable water for 1 toilet flush per person per day. Okay? How much does that take? Depends on how old your toilet is. New toilets typically only take a couple of gallons of water per flush. Older toilets can take up to 7 gallons. So I know I stayed with my brother during a hurricane one time, and we had to hunt water forever to keep his toilets flushed. It was just like 5-gallon bucket after 5-gallon bucket. All right? So you have to plan accordingly to your house. So you run the numbers. You get about, for 5 people, you want, if you had a 2-week supply, for example, you'd want about 140 gallons of potable water. That's about what I keep. And then for non-potable water, you need access to, depending on the size of the commode flushes, anywhere from 140 to about 500 gallons of non-potable water. My neighbor has a swimming pool. There's our non-potable water. We'll negotiate the rest. Okay? Right? We work as a network. All right, so that's a lot of water, though, right? That's more than bottles of water sitting in a stack in the garage. Oh, I've got 3 cases of water, I'm all set. It's more than that. Okay? So I like to show this picture. This is the mentality. You have to migrate from one to the other, right? You're here, you're enjoying the water, all is well, and then you kind of have to go to that, right, where you're really rationing water to survive. Right? Fortunately, not everybody suffers the same, right? Fortunately. Right? Some people don't need as much water. But it's good to run the numbers and understand what you need. So again, you put together a plan. The plan says, what am I worried about? I'm worried about shortages. I'm worried about contamination. What are my goals? Having some for the house, having some transportable by car, enough to support people who might not be ready in the neighborhood, right? I'm not going to watch them die of dehydration out in the street, right? I need to be a little bit prepared. And then I need to have some way of neutralizing or purifying water so we can drink things from streams and other things. And I put down some various details that might be part of a plan. Your plan would be different, right? So that's only 2 needs, and that's only versus a couple of threats, right? So this, you understand, this is a process. It's not something you do in an hour on a Saturday. All right? So I listed out the other needs and just put some notes beside them of some of the things you would think about. So shelter. Well, your shelter could be anything from how do you get out of your house when it catches on fire to how do you keep people from walking into it when you don't want them in it, right? 90% of all breakthroughs occur from open doors. People come right through your door, right? So heating and cooling. Do you have a backup heat source? Probably a lot of you do here, right? How many people have backup heat sources? Yeah, a pretty good portion of you do, right? From kerosene heaters to whatever else you might have. Light, you might have flashlights, candles, etc. Electricity, generators, inverters, and other options. Air might be things like respirators to keep you from maybe catching the flu as easy. Detectors to detect if there's radiation in the air, those kinds of things. HEPA air filters, and on and on. So all of these have different preparations, right? You target those for what you're worried about. Address each of them individually and then put it all together into a plan. Now, at the end of the day, don't forget about your special needs. What special needs? Well, I got 4 kids, and they're special needs, okay? They all have special needs. I don't know what they are, but there's something I have to worry about. But the worrisome ones are things where there's medical problems, right? You have some medical necessity. You need to think about that, right? Elderly people, elderly parents, perhaps, where they're not as mobile. You need to worry about, well, what happens if they're not able to get to the phone? Do they have some other system to call for help, or whatever the case may be? So you need to think about what special needs and what preparations. Pets is another good one, right? If you have pets, if you have a cat, it's probably not going to impact you a whole lot. But if you have 2 horses and 3 German shepherds and a pack of chickens out back, that's part of your plan, right? You have to think through that, okay? All right. So my parting comments, all right? We only had a short time, right? We only had a short time. You can tell we just glossed it, right? I'm sorry, that's what we can do. But use what you learned today and what you can read in my book or other books, it doesn't matter, and put together your own plan, all right? Remember that your concerns are unique, therefore your plans are unique, right? Your plan is not the same as my plan. Everybody's different. And I think as somebody pointed out, you may disagree with some of my statements and recommendations. Great. That's great. Somebody called me out earlier and disagreed with me. Great. That's okay. There's nothing saying what I recommend is right. I'm just telling you, for me, that's what I decide is a reasonable precaution to take. So you give it some thought, and you decide what makes sense. I say go forward and spread the word, right? Help other people see the value of getting better prepared, right? It used to be a time when our nation prided itself on being able to weather the worst possible events, right? We could step up and take it on the chin. I don't feel that way anymore. I just don't feel like our country functions that way anymore. We're so worried about, American Idol and the newest iPod and whatever else is happening. Those things, they're in the back of people's minds now. So start up a network, formal or informal. Could be 3 or 4 buddies. Could be a neighborhood. Could be a church group. Could be whatever. Get your friends, family, neighbors, everybody you can on board. And remember, everybody wants to survive. Everybody does. You just need to convince them that they need to bother with this, okay? That this is something worth bothering about. All right, so last one. Yes, this is the book that I brought here, the handbook, which is sort of the reference guide. There's 3 other books I have. I'm not here to pitch books to you tonight. I'll just tell you what they are, so in case you're wondering. There's a book specifically targeted for EMP attacks and solar storms. Everybody know what EMP attacks are? We can talk about those. But you can? Yeah, go ahead.
Back in the middle 1800s, there was a
Carrington event?
mass ejection that fried the telegraph.
Yes.
A lot of people are probably not aware of that.
Right.
Is there an ability, or has anyone tracked how often that's happened throughout?
Yes. The answer is yes. The Carrington event's what you're talking about. And yeah, there was a large coronal mass emission, caused the telegraphs to overload and catch fire, or some sites that caught fire. And they happened historically about every 100 years. So we're a little bit past due. We're a little bit past due for a major event. We've actually just barely been missed by a couple in the last like 2 or 3 years, where they went the wrong direction, right? They were huge, but they just didn't quite, Earth's here and the sun's here, and these big emissions come off, but if they don't come right at the Earth, then you don't get hit with it. But if they do, you can end up with some real problems, and in our modern age of technology, the electrical system could be really a danger. Yes, sir?
Well, if we get such an event, what effect would that have on the electrical grid, and specifically on nuclear power plants? Because we have 2, one on each side of
Right.
a skinny little station.
Sure. Well, I can't address the nuclear power plant specifically, but what I can say is that the solar events, just to put it into context, the solar events, things caused by the sun, are not going to damage your wristwatch. They're not going to damage your iPod. That's not the type of threat they pose. They pose a threat to long electrical conductors, like transmission lines, power transmission lines, or oil lines, right? Big, not your computer in your car, not from solar events. I know there's a very big misunderstanding. EMP attacks, yes. Solar events, no, and I can explain to you why that is. They're low-frequency events, not high-frequency events. But in answer to your question, the biggest danger is exactly that you couple this energy onto these transmission lines. They damage the transformers associated with that power conversion, and those transformers are very difficult to replace. All right? They're built to order. They take a long time to get there, a long time to be built. So yes, the worst events are they predict you could be without power for months. What they do to the nuclear power plant, I don't know specifically.
See, if we're without power for months, the plants have generators, but
For a short period of time.
not
Yeah.
for months.
No.
So do we face meltdowns then?
I would suspect they have a cool down, enough for cool down. Yeah, they would go into an automatic, but I think they have enough backup to shut down safely. Yeah. Okay. Oh, let me pitch my, my last one here. If you like fiction, I just released a fiction book. I hope I didn't laze somebody back there. I just released a fiction book 2 days ago called The Survivalist. If you're curious, check it out on Amazon or something.